As I touched on in the last video, I want to talk a bit about the issue of women in prison. Um, this is a report in the Times. I'll just read out the headline. Cherie Blair calls for fewer women to be sent to prison. Um, so basically, she's a high-profile lawyer, obviously the wife of the former Prime Minister. I'm just going to read out a bit from this piece. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just because it's covering a few other areas as well. This report's by Ben Ellery and Daisy Eastlake. So I'm going to read this out and then offer my stats. The human rights lawyer and wife of Sir Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, said that there was no sadder place than a women's prison, adding that 95% of jail women's children were taken into care. Giving evidence to the Times Crime and Justice Commission, she also called for the end of pregnant women being sent to jail. She said, when you think that a third of all female convictions are for not paying their TV licence, it's absurd. The cost of those women's places in prison, the impact on their children, the fact that they'll probably lose their accommodation. I mean, what is the sense of that? In 2017, the offence of not paying for a TV licence constituted 30% of female prosecutions, higher than any other offence. That's a Times piece. Blair said that pregnant women should not be sent to prison, whether on remand or not. When you look at what's happening, two babies died, one at the end of 2021, one in 2022, because their mothers gave birth in prison. Women are given birth in handcuffs. That is just barbaric. Um, Blair, 69, also called for separate domestic abuse courts in which offenders are referred to specialist centres rather than prisons. She said it's a bit like drugs, the specialist drug courts that there are now. The results that they have are really impressive, and the sadness is we don't have more of them. See here, if we could start thinking about slightly different solutions for drugs because of the holistic part of that, because drugs is a complicated issue, so is domestic violence. She said that the government should abolish prison sentences of less than 12 months, something that is planning to do with the sentencing bill. This, I assume, is the Conservative government she's talking about, which is going to exist for probably less than another week. That's incense, by the way, if anyone's wondering. She said, I'm old enough to remember not sending people to prison for sentences of less than 12 months, and there was no reason really why it wasn't working. It was just a punitive attitude that came back. Well, I reiterate what I said in the last video about that. There is more in that report, but it's about other issues around prisons. Um, it very much depends on the crime. I mean, if someone is given 6 months for common assault, should they not go to prison? You know, if they violently assaulted a stranger, I'm not convinced on that. Um, Now, Cherie Blair is a well-known feminist, so it isn't really surprising that this is her position. Um, Another person that was supposed to or spoke out on the issue of women in prison was the Liberal Democrat Simon Hughes, who I personally met. And there's numerous people from the left have cited this idea. Feminists have frequently brought up the plight of women in prison. Um, Firstly, it is true that there are certain circumstances that women face obvious things that male inmates wouldn't in terms of health. Women's healthcare is different from men, and it goes without saying that a pregnant woman is by definition physically vulnerable, right? But I have a problem with the implication that if, for example, if a woman's pregnant, then whatever crime she's committed can just be kind of dismissed. Oh, well, she's pregnant, so we better not punish her. What if that pregnant woman, say early in her pregnancy, committed murder? I know statistically it's going to be very low down in terms of, what constitutes most murderers, but doesn't mean it's impossible. What if a pregnant shoplifter, you know, continues to target a small business? Now, maybe they shouldn't go to prison, but I don't think they should escape any form of justice. Um, and also, it's kind of a sexist assumption that female prisoners are all like vulnerable women who are just, you know, they've got into a series of circumstances and, oh, it's unfortunate, we should feel sorry for them. There's some thoroughly evil people in women's prisons. Joanne Dennehy, who killed three men, Um, Need I go through a list of some of the most controversial female prisoners in British history? You know, Myra Hindley, Rose West, the Lucy Letby case, I would include that, but there are some question marks around it. But the point here is, I think it's wrong to just assume all female prisoners are victims. Um, some of them have committed very callous, cruel crimes, and it's absolutely right that they're behind bars. So Blair, I noticed she didn't say it should be totally abolished, which is good. I'm an egalitarian. I don't think that a violent woman should get a softer sentence than a violent man, and I think feminists are hypocritical in this regard. Because they talk about equality when it suits them, you know, but justice is also equality. So it follows that there should be the same responsibility attached. I don't see why a woman who's committed crime should get a softer sentence than a man who's committed the same crime. Now, in terms of the pregnancy thing, obviously the optics are bad of a woman going into labour in handcuffs. I wouldn't put her in handcuffs for that, for obvious reasons. Um, but if she has committed a crime that is so bad that warrants prison, i.e., murder or arson or robbing a pensioner of the life savings, then the argument is, the child will be put into care, and is that the best thing for the child? But the victim also has to be considered, and you also have to put this in mind: is it the best thing for the child to have a mother who is a serious criminal, who may not have shown remorse? The thing about TV licenses, I don't think anyone should be going to prison for not paying TV licenses. In fact, I would, I don't even think that should be a criminal offence. I think it should be a civil offence at worst. But Cherie Blair's spinning a bit of a narrative there, that a lot of female inmates are in prison for not paying their TV license. There's a difference between being prosecuted for not paying a TV license and being in jail for not paying a TV license. I mean, for all we know, they're getting fines or community sentences. I agree that shouldn't be a major crime. I don't even think it should be a crime, but I think that's a little bit of a false narrative because it implies, I don't know what the numbers of female inmates are. It'll be a lot lower than men, but let's say it's several thousand women in prisons. Are we really to believe that there are hundreds of women in prison, i.e., 30%, who haven't paid their TV license? I find that very hard to believe. Um, in the past, there used to be a term for pregnant offenders. It was this. The term was, I believe, pleading their belly, i.e., if they were pregnant, they could be spared the noose by the fact that they were pregnant. So much for male privilege, because the male condemned would be immediately sent to the gallows. Um, Now, I'm not saying that that was right or wrong, but if you're truly an egalitarian, then it follows that you will accept that a woman who's committed a crime in the same circumstances as a man should face the same punishment. Um, Accept that there are, a female offender who's pregnant is obviously in a different physical situation than a male offender who obviously isn't. And I completely support the idea, for example, of protecting female offenders from trans women who may be biologically male, issues like that. But the problem I have with this whole direction that Cherie Blair and others is pushing is the idea that all female offenders are vulnerable victims. Certainly, there will be examples there where they may have been victims of domestic abuse. Um, if you have, for example, a case where a woman has been abused for years and she lashed out and she's being punished for that, I'd be very sympathetic to her. Um, but I'm far less sympathetic of, say, a pregnant shoplifter. She's still a criminal. The fact that she's pregnant doesn't suddenly make her innocent. So it's this implication that a pregnant woman is innocent just by the state of being pregnant. She's not. If she's committed a criminal offence, she is by definition an offender. It may be that it isn't the most practical thing to have a heavily pregnant woman in a cell, certainly not with another inmate, but I don't think if she has committed a serious crime, she should just escape justice. Because Blair isn't even saying she should do a community sentence. Instead, it's almost as if she's saying she should just escape justice altogether. I thoroughly disagree with that. Being pregnant doesn't make you stupid. Being pregnant doesn't mean you lose your conscience of what is right and wrong. So, and it's a choice, unless she was raped. It's a choice. So, I have a problem with that thinking that because a woman's pregnant, she's therefore innocent by definition. I mean, there's circumstances, if a building's on fire, a pregnant woman, like an elderly person or a disabled person, will be seen as vulnerable, or if there's some other disaster situation, and that's justified because the physical situation is more vulnerable. But when it comes to crime, if a pregnant woman, I'm specifically focusing on this area, I don't think she should escape justice. I think if she's in labour, that should be handled in a humane way. I don't think she should go into labour in handcuffs, certainly not. But Cherie Blair is basically saying all pregnant female offenders are innocent, so they shouldn't face any punishments. I disagree with that. I think it's wrong. I believe in equality, and part of equality is equal responsibility. So, I don't know, some people might disagree with me on this. Um, But if feminists really believe in equality, they will accept that female criminals should also face consequences for their actions. Unless you have mitigating circumstances, like, for example, she's been a victim of domestic violence and, um, for example, she lashed out at the abusive boyfriend or husband. That's a mitigating circumstance. But then it gets into grey areas. Let's say she's been a victim of domestic abuse, but she robs a pensioner of her life savings or his life savings. Should one sort of mitigate the other? I'm not sure. A lot of people go through difficult situations and they don't resort to crime, so I'm not sold on that. Um, in terms of tailor-made courts, yeah, that's probably a sensible thing. But fundamentally, I'm a staunch advocate of justice, and I don't think that female offenders should get special treatment just because they're women. I don't think pregnant offenders should be told, well, you're pregnant, so that makes the crime okay, we'll just forget about the crime. No, what about the victim? Um, like I say, this notion, anyone who's seen Bad Girls, I didn't really watch it, but anyone who's seen that show will know that this idea that they're all vulnerable little shrinking violence is nonsense. There's some tough women in prison who deserve to be there. They've done terrible things. I've heard of cases where they have scarred people from a bottle attack in a nightclub, scarred other women, scarred men. There was one case where a woman threw acid on her boyfriend's face. We often assume that's a male on female thing, not always. Now, should someone like that escape prison? I think absolutely not. Um, so we'll see what the Labour Party does in this one, but I think fundamentally equality means equality. Let me know your thoughts.